Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special board meeting here on October 30th, the day before Halloween. So with that, we'll get started. We're going to ask Director Wayne Rayfield to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Wayne.
You're welcome.
Are there, I guess we better go for a roll call first. Jody, I think you can know we're all here this evening. Looks like we're all here. And that takes us our next item, our oral communications. Are there any requests from the public that are not on the agenda? Okay, well, great. We're moving right along then. We'll start with our new business. And item one, what's the pleasure of the board to hear public comments first or go through presentations?
I think it might be a help to the people speaking to hear the presentation.
Very good.
But that's
Very good.
Just my opinion.
Okay, we'll take that opinion as what we're going to head. So, Rick Shintako, are you going to lead us on the first item of the Doheny Ocean Desalination Project?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. This item is a task order number 18 to GHD Consultants to assist with the contract development process. So, as you may recall, on October 24th, the board, at that board meeting, I brought forward task order number 2, which recommended Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood to complete the RFQ related request for qualifications related items related to building or developing the contract, the design, build, operate contract. For the public's sake, our goal is to get the RFQ documents out in the early part of the calendar year 2020. Hence, we're on a fast track to get this done through Hawkins, Delafield, and as part of this process, we need technical assistance. So, per Hawkins' recommendation, we're asking GHD to work closely with Eric Peterson, who's the principal of that firm, to develop the quals or the qualifications documents. As you can see on page 2 of the staff report, this would include GHD assisting with the coordination, input, and preparation of materials related to the various technical requirements and components of the project, and the third bullet down, input and preparation of materials on risk allocation for various components of the project is very important as it relates to our ratepayers. This work would be completed over the next 3 months and with the release of the RFQ package anticipated for January of 2020. That would conclude my staff report.
Thank you, Rick. Any further questions or any questions by the board? I may ask that first before we pull public comment. Any questions on Rick's presentation? None. Okay. Then we do have a request from the public, and Stan Williams, if you can come up and give us all your name, address, and all that particulars.
Oh, good evening, members of the board, staff. Stan Williams with Poseidon Water. And some of you may recall a couple of years ago we had some discussions about the Poseidon Water process for partnering with public agencies and how it might fit with this project or not. And I think it was 2017 last time we talked about it. And so at that time, we were pretty committed to one form of P3 type partnership, as we've done in Carlsbad and doing in Huntington Beach. But things have changed a lot since then. I just want to make sure you all understand. We had some discussions about hybrid approaches. And your counsel, Mr. Peterson's, actually done some presentation on hybrid types of arrangements for these type of partnerships with different components. And so I'm hoping, I noticed in the agenda item under the scope, there was a discussion of input into the risk allocation issue. And I'm hoping that can be a public point of input as well, because we've had some experience with our projects about the difficulty of the risk allocation between design, build, and operate. And so we want to be helpful to the project as much as we can, and we want to have the flexibility to perhaps suggest other approaches as you finalize your procurement approach for this project.
Well, thank you, Stan. I think we're all ears on different concepts and ideas. So we're not locked in at anything. So if you have some, please bring them, give it the general manager and let us know how things that might help in the process.
Well, thank you. I will do that. Appreciate it.
I don't see any other requests to speak.
No, that's all we had for one.
Okay, then, well, I guess it's time to see if we have a motion to support the
I'll
change
move
order.
the recommended action.
We have a motion, and I'll second the motion. So we'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So that's unanimous. So that takes us to item number 2 on our agenda. As soon as we roll there, okay. The Ocean Desal project again, and now we're going to have the peer review of the cost estimates. The board has been interested. We've heard some preliminary reviews or numbers over the last 2-3 years, and the board I think early this year thought it would be a good idea for a peer review, a third party look over the numbers to make sure we're on the right track. So that's where we are this evening, and we appreciate one of our colleague firms that are already in the mud or in the slant wells. But I'll let Rick introduce. Rich.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Thank you, Mr. President. You covered that very well, and I'm just going to give just a slight bit of historical context on how we got here with Rich Finland. And before I introduce Richard Finland, who is the president of Cal-Am Water, and we're privileged to have him here today to present the peer review of our project here. And I wanted to let the public know as well that it was a little difficult to find a consultant team to do this. So we were privileged that Rich Finland had been leading the efforts in a slant well ocean desal project and had the ability through the Cal-Am company to perform this peer review. And we have a technical memo that's attached to the staff report along with a presentation that he'll be going through. And without further ado, thank you, Rich.
All right. So good evening, members of the board, President. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So my name is Rich Swinland. Again, I'm the president for California American Water. I got a couple of slides. I'll talk about our company in a minute, but just a little bit about me, just so you know kind of my involvement with this. I moved to California in 2010, and back at that time, I was tasked with building the pipeline from a desalination plant that Marina Coast Water District was going to build in Marina, and Cal-Am was just going to buy the water. So I was actually the director of engineering for California American Water at the time. So I've been living this project since 2010. When that project ran into some hiccups, California American Water had to abandon that project, and unfortunately we're still suing the old partners over that issue. But in April of 2012, we proposed the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project. And so basically I want to walk you through tonight all of our experiences with what we've learned on almost every aspect of it, and then of course how it relates to cost, and then how it relates to your project, which is very, very, very similar. So without further ado, I'll get going. Hopefully this thing will work. Perfect. So a little bit about American Water, just so you know who we are. We've been around for over 100 years, mostly on the East Coast, but we came to California in 1966. We were the original owner of the Sweetwater Authority down in San Diego. Some people know that, may not know that. We still serve down in San Diego, Coronado, and Imperial Beach. We entered in the Monterey market in 1966 as well when we bought the California Water and Telephone Company, and we've been working on the peninsula ever since then. American Water, we do about 1 billion gallons of water every day. So we know what we're doing. 7,100 employees, and proud to say, we get a lot of awards for running our plants well. We're very proud of that fact. So we're in 45 states. We do basically anything to do with water. But primarily, we're a regulated business, and what regulated business means is that in each state we operate in, on this slide, we're regulated by the Public Utilities Commission in those states. So I'm the president for California and Hawaii. I got the best two states in the country, so it's a good deal. But you can see all the other states. I've worked for the company in Kentucky. I built a 20 MGD surface water treatment plant for the company in Monterey, Kentucky, of all places. Interesting how that worked out. And I also built some plants up in Pennsylvania for the company. So I've been with American Water about 17 years total, with a little hiatus in the middle of that to buy an engineering company that didn't go well. I didn't know the recession was happening. Anyway, that's life. Okay, so I've been in California since 2010, primarily working on this. Just so who California American was, just to give you a kind of a scale for us, we do about $70 to $100 million a year in capital every year, just in the state of California. Certainly, the Monterey Desal project is our biggest project in the state's history, and we're about $100 million into it right now. Our average demand is 65 MGD. It was 90 when I got here in 2010, so that's the state of where California is. Our revenues each year about $218 million, but last year 178,000 connections, blah, 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 go on. So we serve all the way down Imperial Beach, all the way up to Sonoma County. And for those watching the news, the Kincaid fire, that affected our systems. We've been under PSPS for several weeks now, and we were fully evacuated, but got to give my guys credit. We made water every single minute of every single day during those fires, even while we were evacuated. So real proud of our team for working through that. Certainly, we've been in Monterey County working on that water supply challenge for many, many years. All right, so without further ado, let's get into what we're going to talk about tonight. So I put this agenda item. I don't have slides per se on value engineering, but I'll talk about that when we get to the end of it, but just where we've been and how that could benefit you guys. All right, so I'm going to talk about our desal project, how it relates to your desal project, and then we're going to get into the cost. And Rick, I don't know how you want to do it, if you want to do questions as we go or wait till I talk. I'm open to whatever format works best for the board. This is for your information, so however you want to do it.
Well, I think if anyone has questions along the way, that's fine. I think it's probably easier.
Okay, I'm good with that. Just wanted to throw that out there. All right, so a little bit about our project. I mentioned this earlier. We were originally going to purchase 8 million gallons a day from Marina Coast Water District's desal plant. So I had the privilege of working on the preliminary design from that with the consultants back then, so I got to see their approach. That project was vertical wells with a couple slant wells. That's how that project started. So that's where we had our first foray into slant wells. Unfortunately, I talked about we had a little bit of conflict of interest issue with a consultant and a board member, and so that those project agreements all were deemed void by the court system. After that failed, we proposed in 2012 the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project. You'll see that as MPWSP. We originally proposed that as a 5.49 MGD project. I personally did all the cost estimates with help from RBF, who now is part of Michael Baker, right? So Paul Finley, many of you may know that name. He and I worked on all the cost estimates that went into that original application for that desalination project. We applied to the commission in 2012. We finally got an order from the commission. And when I say commission, I'm talking about the California Public Utilities Commission. We got an order, unanimous decision, approving our project and all of its cost in September of 2018. Okay, so basically a lot of the information today is on what we've been doing and what we've been learning over that time. By November of 2013, however, we had to refine our project size. We learned a little bit more things about demand and different issues and constraints, and so we upped our size to 6.4 million gallons per day, or 9.6. Why the two sizes? I just tell everybody up front, why the two sizes? There was growing concern amongst a lot of the stakeholders on the Monterey Peninsula that a big desal plant wasn't the best solution, and they wanted us to look at a recycled water variant. And so both sides provided evidence. Ultimately, the commission decided for us that a 6.4 MGD plant with this 3,500 acre feet per year Pure Water Monterey project, back then it was called Groundwater Replenishment Project, now it's called Pure Water Monterey, that was the best overall solution. So the commission did order us to do that. We signed a water purchase agreement with Monterey One Water, who's developing the Pure Water Monterey project, for 3,500 acre feet per year. That project is maybe 99% done. It's under construction. They're supposed to start delivering water to the basin hopefully in November. Okay, but that's that, and we know all their cost. Part of the process with the commission was they had provided their cost. I rebutted some of their costs because I thought they were low, and so I wanted to tell you I've got a lot of experience with the cost on this project because this is what I've been doing for the last so many years. And finally, in 2017, we updated our cost to the commission as part of the hearing process, and as well as 2018, and ultimately the commission approved our cost cap of $329 million for our project. So a little bit of a breakdown of how that works out. And so we've been ordered to do the 6.4. It's $132 million for the plant itself. And when I say that's the fully loaded cost, that's all the engineering, all the permitting, everything tied into those numbers, just kind of divvied up into the buckets. Okay, it does not include financing costs. It's a straight capital cost. Our pipelines, this is one difference, our project with your project. We have $117 million of pipelines. That's a lot of pipelines. But the reality is we're replumbing our entire system to make this desal plant work. We were gravity flow from the Carmel River heading north, south to north, and now our plant's way north of us, and we've got to bring all the water back south. So we have $100 million of piping. That's slightly different. But the intake wells and brine return, that's $80 million. So that's the 329. And those were the numbers approved by the commission. Under O&M costs, the commission also set up our O&M budget. And so here's the numbers that we have in there. $7.5 million for power, labor and miscellaneous 3.4, repairs and replacement. I'll talk about those individually as we get further in the deck. Purchased GWR, that's purchasing water from the Monterey One Water. So you won't have that cost in your numbers, but we do at $6 million a year. Basically, we're going to be buying water from them for $1,720 an acre foot. That was the agreed upon number in their water purchase agreement with us. We understand they're currently at $19.76. So when we get to your final numbers, you're going to see you guys are cheaper than recycled water that Monterey One Water is doing. So pretty impressive. And then we have to lease capacity from their outfall. So that's our cost. I put a couple pictures on here just to show one of the challenges on our project is what the slant wells do to the groundwater basin. And this is some of the modeling work that was done as part of the EIR. It does create a protective trough that helps prevent seawater intrusion. The top figure is what the seawater intrusion is today. And the bottom one is what it will be after our wells are, because we are lowering it a little bit, but the line is flatter, and flatter lines in groundwater modeling means less flow, and that's a benefit to the basin. All right, so your project, Doheny Ocean Desalination Project, it's initially sized as 5 MGD. It's going to be expandable potentially up to 15. You're using slant wells just like we are, and your brine is being discharged with the wastewater just like ours. So very, very similar projects. All right, so how did we do this? How did I come up to try to comparison? So remember, I'm not a consultant per se. I'm a president of a water utility, and so I'm just kind of giving you peer review of what I thought your project cost would be if I was looking at it for my application, right? So what I tried to do is we have bid out most of our work. Not every dollar, but we bid out most of our work. So the design build, we have a design build contract for the desalination plant itself. We bid that out. All of our bid documents, every bit of them, even the specifications, the RFQs, the RFPs, every bit of that is on our website. So it's free for anyone in the public to look at, even our scoring sheets, how we did all this. It's all, and normally as a private company, we don't do that, but there was concerns in our community of how that all works. So everything's out on the website. We also used Hawkins Delafield to help us through the contracting process, and we had our engineering people work with them very, very closely to make sure we developed a spec that worked for us as the owner. I call us an active owner. We would like to know what we're buying, and so that process worked very well for us. All right, so how did we get to the cost? Basically, I took our bid prices that we awarded. Not only did we bid all this work, we awarded all this work. Now, this was a little bit of a I don't know, I want to use the word gamble on our part, but we're under a cease and desist order in Monterey that we need to be off the Carmel River by 2021. So we wanted to lock in the prices as soon as we could because we wanted to have control over that. We did have some foresight, though, to put in these bid documents an escalation clause. And we didn't force an escalation clause on the contractor. We asked each contractor bidding, what escalation indices would you like to use and how would you weight them? So that way, once we awarded the work and we came back to actually give them a notice to proceed, we had a methodology to negotiate the price. And we thought that was pretty fair. So you get the benefit of, I know all those escalations, and I've used them to come up with a number that I think is real for today's dollars. Okay. Our desal pricing is the biggest component. Our contract with that contractor is just under $100 million. And so that price, we just finished negotiating with them. So you're getting the benefit of a fresh price. And when I say fresh, they went out and revisited all their subs. They've talked to all their vendors, and that's the number that they think is good, and it's current through the end of December. So that's a benefit for you guys. We think that's true market conditions.
Rich, I see on the very top of the columns, the capital costs are in 2017 dollars.
Yes.
Are your you got brand new fresh numbers? Are they 2017 fresh?
I can't, well, because how I started this process when I started doing this for you, I didn't have a final number with CDM yet. That's our contractor. So these are 2017, but when I get to the summary, we put them all into current dollars. But good question. Yes. But there's an asterisk because when I do escalation, I don't escalate the desal part because I've already made that current. Okay. All right. But what I wanted, and that's why there's a little asterisk on that part. Real quick, I did try to make the project similar because they are slightly different. So I removed some things, and that's what this list of items are. So it says components in MPWSP desal, but not in Doheny. So we have a really large clear well. I don't think you guys need one that big, so I took it out. Now let me make a comment on that, just so as we start thinking about things and how things change in life. I'm currently working with Southern California Edison, and I know that's not the power provider for you guys, but they're doing a study on overgeneration. And so what's going on is that there's so much solar power in the day, they want to put it somewhere. And so they're talking to water utilities. Hey, could you pump harder in the daytime and then rest at nighttime? And I said, well, if you give me an incentive, we can talk anything, right? So the concept that could help with your energy costs, and we're very early in discussions. I don't know where SDG&E would be, but some of these trade-offs you have to think. Okay, maybe I need a bigger clear well now because I'll be pumping longer hours of the day. But anyway, right now your clear well was my clear well was too big, so I just made an adjustment. A couple of I don't need to go through all those details, but basically I tried to make the projects apples and apples. And when you get through the number, my estimate for the project is $89 million. Okay.
Rich, real quick.
Yes.
You talk about power. Much of Monterey and the peninsula is under community choice energy or agri.
It's just starting.
It is, okay.
Yeah, so we have not negotiated that with them yet. When we did all these estimates, we were in active discussions with PG&E. Now, to be fair, that was before all this stuff going on with them. And we were talking with them about a lot of different things. Do we bring in high voltage power because they have a lot cheaper rate? And we're about 3 miles away from a pretty high voltage line. And it could be 4 or 5 cents kilowatt hour type of savings. So those are all options that are kind of open to you. You'll see I just kind of picked a simple number for you guys, but as you work through your project, you can explore those different options.
Okay, thank you.
Lastly on power too, just so we're co-located next to the landfill. The landfill has an 8 megawatt natural gas, methane gas from the landfill plant. They're currently tied up in a PPA to someone else. But when that becomes available, we want to look at that as well. Now, when I initially talked to those guys, they want to make money too. So like everything in life, it's a negotiation. But they're probably in the 11, 12, 13 cent kilowatt hour range based on our discussions. It's kind of what we plan for you guys.
One follow-up question before we get too far away. What was the trigger that required you to come off that river water? By 2021.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is a great story. So it all goes back to 1995. And the State Water Resources Control Board made a determination at that time that the groundwater we'd been pumping from the Carmel River aquifer was not groundwater, but it was surface water flowing underground. And so if you have a surface water, you have to have a water right. We did not have water rights for all that water. We have water rights for some, but we didn't have water rights for the groundwater. We thought it was groundwater. They said it's not. Okay, so that's what started the whole process. So they issued an order, Order 9510, and they basically instructed us to start doing things to benefit the river. What a lot of people don't know, part of the rest of the story there is At the same time they issued that order to Cal-Am to stop reducing or start reducing pumping on the Carmel River, they also awarded the Water Management District 29,000 acre feet of surface water rights if they would build a dam. So this is how this project came to be. The Water Management District had all these water rights to build a dam, so they went out to build a new dam. It went to a Prop 218 vote and failed. And Cal-Am is a regulated utility by the Public Utilities Commission. We didn't have to do a Prop 218 vote, so we said, okay, we'll take your project and we'll rebrand it as the new Carmel River Dam, and we applied to the California Public Utilities Commission. And during that whole process, a couple of legislators got involved, and they said, we don't do dams in California anymore. You need to look at Plan B. So Plan B was studied, and probably 100 different alternatives came around. The result of Plan B was they wanted to do a desalination plant just like Tampa Bay and just like Carlsbad. Basically co-locate a desal plant next to a big power plant. And the benefits were you have all the water for intake, you have all the water for discharge, and you have cheap power. That's the philosophy, right? So we proposed, I know I'm going way offline, but this is the history of how we got there.
Well, it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
So,
I'm almost done the story, but we proposed the Coastal Water Project back then, and that was going to be a desal plant next to Moss Landing, do basically an open ocean intake type of plant. In the approval process of that plan at the commission, they made us look at two other alternatives. One was buying the water from Marina Coast, and that was the project I talked at the very beginning, a combination of vertical wells and slant wells. Another variant we looked at was an all slant well project, and we looked at that open ocean intake project. There's an approved EIR for those three projects in Equal. When we started working through all the local politics, the Marina Coast regional desal project's the one that won out. And so that's why we have kind of abandoned the model, if you will, at that time. So that's the history. That's how we got to where we are.
Thank you.
Last point, though, in 2009, the State Water Resources Control Board got tired of lack of progress. And so they put us under a cease and desist order. And the cease and desist order is pretty tough. No new customers. We haven't added a single new connection in Monterey since 2010. So when you figure out how to spend $329 million and you have no new customers, it's pretty tough on existing customers. So that's one of the things when I try to talk to the state regulators about this, you got to be careful what you ask for, because sometimes things take too long. And if you didn't take as long, you wouldn't have that impact to those customers. But that's where we are now. The original deadline was 2016. Because the old project failed with the legal stuff, we got in a 5-year extension to 2021. And we're trying to meet that deadline as we sit here today. So sorry, I'm from the South, so I can go a long time if you ask me a question. All right. I failed to mention this on the Tampa Bay project. The original project on Tampa Bay, it's a 25 MGD open ocean intake project. The original project had some startup issues. It went out for rebid, and to basically fix the pretreatment. American Water won that contract combined with Acciona. So our folks have been running that project for about 25 years. And how that relates to us in Monterey as well is Eric Sabolsi, who was one of the startup guys for us at American Water on that Tampa Bay project. He was my operations manager in Monterey during the development of all these projects. So we leaned on him pretty heavily to make sure we specified the right materials, make sure that, because he knew all the things that didn't work on the Tampa Bay project and made them better. Unfortunately, Eric's not with us any longer. He chose to go work for another firm, but we got the benefit of his expertise while he worked for us, and so he's part of the results of this project are because of his input. All right, so $89 million, so it's a little bit higher than the estimate that GHD had back then when they did the initial estimate for you. But when we look at all the other components, you'll see how it builds up, and we'll get to a final number. So I'm continuing on capital cost. Oh, let me go back. Sorry. So the raw water pipelines and brine connections, we have bid all that work out ourselves. There's a couple components that we hadn't bid out, and so when we haven't bid out, I carry a higher contingency. You'll see that on the next slide. And on the slant wells themselves, we bid all that out. We actually got 3 bidders, 3 drillers, and so we're real proud of that. We ended up awarding to Bort Longyear. So they're chomping at the bit to drill these wells for us. They did drill our test well for us. And part of the process with them, we actually gave them money up front so they could build a bigger machine, a bigger dual rotary machine, so that the next time we drill these wells, it's going to go better. they got a good machine. I hear it's on display in Las Vegas at some big construction trade show. They're bragging about it. So anyhow, that's a benefit to anyone else who's going to do a slant well, that there's some better equipment out there to do these wells. We did do a test well, so we learned a lot. I know you guys did a test well as well, but yeah. Anyway, so those costs are all based on pretty much actual bid cost and awarded cost. Just as a background, when we were preparing all these costs and working with the staff, we looked at other variants and alternatives. Like I looked at the average of all the bids and all that kind of stuff. In the end, we were able to go with what we awarded and just escalate it. But we looked at a bunch of different variations just to got to do a truth check on all the numbers. So feel pretty confident of how it worked out. Okay, so now we start adding up all the other stuff. So we know there's capital costs for construction, but you have to engineer it, you have to start up, and you have to do all these other things. So how we did this, basically the design, engineering, and startup, 16.1%. That's the cost we saw in my project. So I just carried that same cost for you guys. I think GHD maybe had a little slighter, different estimate at the time, but they kind of did the math a little bit differently. But in the end, we're all going to cover the cost to do the project. Non-desal engineering and construction management. So there are some parts of the project that aren't desal, so those still have to be engineered. And so I put 15% to cover for that. Contingency. Because I've awarded all this stuff, I don't have a ton of contingencies in my mind. But I still have some. Like any good, project manager, you need to have a reserve for some things that pop up. 8.6% is kind of an oddball number, but that's a weighting of what we've awarded versus what we haven't awarded. And so we're carrying about 5% on contingencies for the stuff that we've awarded. And then for the non-awarded stuff, we're still carrying 20% because we haven't all bid it all. And so how that works out with where we are in our process is 8.6. So I just kind of kept that number just to build up a contingency based on what we know and don't know. The land number comes from you guys, just working with your staff on basically where you are. We just plug that number in right there for you.
Rich, can I just clarify that that's the land for the easements for the conveyance pipeline and the wellheads at the state parks?
Yep.
Only. Doesn't include the treatment plant, which we own in title.
Now, under contractor overhead and profit, GHG, the way they built their estimate and the way they did it is correct. That's how it's typically done during the design and the planning phase. They put in the overhead and profit for the contractor and allowances for known and unknowns. Because we are awarded, I didn't cover all that because that's already built into my prices. Okay, so you can see we have nothing there, and they have that about $15 million. So when you add all that up, the most probable construction costs I came up with were $114 million versus their number at 102. Now we have to escalate to 2020, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. So their number, using the GHG number and using common escalation of 3.3%, you add another $10 million to them, you get them to 112 GHD. But for us, my desal plant is current. Okay, and so I just escalated the remaining items. So that's why my escalation number is only $4.5 million. You add it all up, I'm at 118 versus their 112. So not bad. Pretty tight actually when you think about it over this time frame. And then we use certainly a high-end estimate, 120%, 85%, because there will be market conditions. It will be somewhere in there. That's our estimate. We proposed the exact same thing to the commission when we applied for our project. We said, hey, it could be anywhere between 85 and 120%. What we ended up, in the end, the commission did not give us the extra 20% on top. So the 329 is our number with all our contingencies, but they gave us the ability to come back if we need to, if we go over that for market conditions. So that's built into our financing. Any questions on how we build up these numbers?
Don't see any questions, but it certainly looks like GHD has done a great job getting this.
Yeah.
Didn't sandbag us and didn't tell us something we didn't want to hear. So we appreciate that, Mark.
Yeah, agree. All right, so the next part of this is just as important as the O&M cost, right? And so what I did is I took our O&M cost model that we built for the commission process. Now, I don't have true operating costs from our contractor yet because they haven't built it. But in our contract with CDM Smith, they're our design builder for the desal plant, they actually have, there's requirements they need to meet a certain number. They need to meet a certain power per million gallons. So we basically took their bid numbers and tried to populate all these things. So the chemical costs based on what they estimate they'll use for chemicals. The media membrane replacement, When we went through that process originally, just to give you the background on this, Rick said, Rich, your number's too low. I took the number that CDM Smith gave us, and it probably was low. So I went back, and I know some of the guys at Carlsbad, and I called them up, and I said, hey, what's your cost to replace a membrane? And they told me, and I said, how many do you have? And they told me, and then how long are they going to last? And he said 7 years is safe. I mean, just as a ballpark number. So I basically plugged in that number based on what my contacted for the Carlsbad project told me. So I think that's a pretty fair number. It's basically $400 a membrane. How that works out to be. The removal and replacement, this is always, it's a percentage. It's just done on a percentage basis. There's always some questions on how do you determine that. We've in our mind validated that number because CDM Smith, which has a big chunk of it, that was within what they budgeted. But also we spent a lot of time specifying materials for this project with the know-how that our team has because they've worked on these projects before. So it's kind of we felt the number was fair based on what we know. An example was super duplex steels, right? When you're doing your slant well, all that stuff that's super corrosive. We learned what steels work and don't work. And as an example, during our test well, we were getting crunched on time. And so one of the guys just threw in a cheap bolt. It's still stainless, but he threw in a cheap bolt because we knew we had to get this thing up and it's running. It didn't last. It didn't last more than a month and a half. Had to pull that thing out, replace with the right bolt, and the right bolts are all look perfect. So there's definitely, you have to know what you're doing. And so we feel like we learned a lot during that whole process. And so we specified materials. So FRP when it's correct, HDP when it's correct, all the materials we think are correct. So our removal and replacement budget we think is appropriate for what we know going into the project. Labor and miscellaneous, you see a little bit of a difference there between what GHG estimated and what I have estimated. The main difference being for that is we put in $250,000 a year to monitor brine out in the ocean. So I'll tell you that story real quick. Basically, Surfriders was one of the interveners in our process at the PUC, and they were worried about what's going to happen to the brine discharge out in the ocean. We entered into a settlement agreement with them, and we agreed to place seafloor monitoring brine stations at certain locations around the outfall. And then we also agreed to what steps we would take if those things showed that we were exceeding the 2,000 limit that the state board allows us. We estimate that's going to be $250,000 a year to do all that monitoring. It's not cheap, but we thought it was certainly important, and certainly the protecting the ocean is important to us as well. How that works is you have to send a boat out, and the boat's got to go pick up the units are down there. They basically sit on the ocean floor. When they're done collecting, they shoot a buoy up to the top. Boat comes up, picks the buoy up, and it pulls the whole unit up, download the data, you put it back, and you send it back to the ocean floor. So that process is a little bit labor intensive, but we certainly thought it was worth it. So we included it in our O&M cost for you.
Question?
Yep. Yeah, so great question. So the bay is about 33,500 on average. Our modeling was done with no wastewater effluent, zero, so all brine. And the reason for that is the wastewater plant that we're going to, it does, well, first off, it's doing the groundwater replenishment project, so 3 MGD is going to come off the discharge. But secondly, if you've ever had an artichoke, many people don't realize that that's all irrigated with recycled water from that facility. And so in the summer months, they have zero going out, the outfall. So we had to monitor that. We had to do it that way as worst case. So our brine, it's in that 50,000 number, roughly.
Question on the outfall as well.
Yeah.
How far offshore and what kind of depth are you at?
Yeah, so the outfall is owned by Monterey One Water, formerly the Pollution Control Agency. It's, if my memory, I'm going off memory here, but it's roughly 2 miles out and about just under 100 feet, I think in the 95 feet range. It has diffuser ports on the last maybe 1,500 feet, 2-inch diameter duckbill diffusers. So all that was modeled as part of the EIR work. There's some debate, do we leave them flat or do we angle them up? There's pros and cons to doing all that, and that'll be kind of probably fleshed out when we get the final permit from the permitting agencies.
And then at what point were you challenged by the Surfrider Foundation?
Well, they intervened at the very beginning.
Okay.
And they were worried about the brine discharge. But we, like I said, we worked it out with them. They were worried about sizing. They didn't want a plant that was too big because in the end, bigger plant, bigger brine, right? and they're worried about how would we monitor it and what would we do if we had, if the plant put out brine stronger than what and I don't have the document in front of me, but we laid out what we would do, including doing a capital upgrade and modifying the outfall to make it work better.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Okay. These numbers were also escalated, right? Because these are 2017 dollars. We escalated them a slightly lower escalation, 2.7%. And just so you know why I did that, well, a lot of it's because I think labor is a good chunk of it. I just negotiated a couple union contracts with my guys, and 2.7 is kind of how that averaged out. So it seemed pretty reasonable. But also, when you look at some of the power numbers, that number seems to be in check. That number could go up and down based on your experience, but that's the number we used. Okay. All right. So a little bit higher than GHG's estimate, but pretty realistic to where we think. Oh, power. Let me just say that. So I used 12 kilowatt, but escalated it to 13, assuming that's the power at the time. And like I said earlier, you can work with your power providers to see if there's any other options out there for you. If you bring in higher voltage, they may have a potential discount for you, or even over generation if that's something that SDG&E is looking at. You could dig into. All right, so putting it all together, right? We got O&M costs, we have capital costs. Now we want to try to bring that into a cost per acre foot. I used the 1.9% state revolving fund financing, 30% for over 30 years. Excuse me. I assumed 18.3 million, and I think there's a couple of different grants going on there that make up that number. If my memory is correct, 8.3 for one and 10 for another. I did not use any, because I don't do municipal financing. I do investor-owned financing, so I didn't play anything with debt coverage or reserves or any other stuff that you may have to work on yourself. And I did not include asset depreciation. In our financing models, we have to include the depreciation of the assets and rates. And then this does not include any cost you've spent to date, because I didn't know how to handle that exactly. So when you add it all up, I know it does include the MET rebate of $475. So when you add it all up, it's capital cost, and that works out to be a financing cost, interest and payment, right? O&M added up, divided by your supply, $5,300 $5,300 is your supply. That's assuming about a 95% run rate on the plant. Okay, so a little bit of a cushion there. $1,805 per acre foot. Okay. All right, any questions on this? A lot to digest. All right, so I have another item on this. So value engineering, I put it on the agenda because I didn't want to forget. We have done value engineering on our project. It was basically one of the requirements we made with the public agencies that were kind of watching our cost. And I have that entire report. It's free to you guys. You can use it. Since you haven't designed anything yet, you can use it as part of your design process to say, hey, do we want to do this or do we want to do that? I'll tell you one of the ones that came up that was interesting from a dollar perspective. It had to do with how do you design the plant to run from an efficiency perspective? Did you go for a higher recovery or lower recovery? And the trade-off that we made was, the higher the efficiency of the plant, the brine strength increases. And so I wanted to make sure that when we discharged the brine, that we still had a little bit of a safety factor out there. So we chose to operate more like in a 41, 42% efficiency, overall efficiency, which is probably on the low end of what's out there or what's capable. But for us, it worked because of the brine limitation. But there's a lot of options. Like I said, I'm happy to share our report with you. You guys can go through it, and we had some pretty good, high-powered experts around the country looking at these ideas for us, and that's free for you guys to look at as well.
Well, thank you, Rich. I tell you, South Coast is really in debt to you. We really appreciate all the intel you have on this project, and I know you've stubbed your toes along the ways, and it's certainly helped.
Well, everyone in the DSAR world has.
It's helped us follow her on scent. So it's been a great presentation, and I know that for the audience, GHD had done some runs on energy, and as we look towards alternative energy, that might be where we can pull that 1,800 down. I think we saw some numbers that were every penny you save is about $50 an acre foot. So we'll be looking really hard at lowering that alternative energy cost. Colleagues, some questions for Rich?
Yeah. Rich, Bill mentioned alternative energy.
Yeah.
Did you, in the Monterey project, look at any alternative energy sources?
So the main one we looked at was the landfill that was located next
Yes.
door to us, right? And they have 8 megawatts available. We needed 5 to be safe. Actually, about 3.9 for our smaller plant size. Because our project has been delayed a little bit over time, a bunch of different issues, they said they couldn't wait for me, so they signed a PPA with someone else. When that's over, certainly we'd be willing to talk to them. We were worried about, certainly we were very, very worried about the cost of power, but we're also worried about the quality of power, just because where our plant was located. So we spent a lot of time and effort making sure the quality would get there. And we had some good discussions with PG&E.
Quality and reliability are two concerns, I think.
Yes.
With alternative sources. So,
Yeah. Yeah, let me add this. We did not design the plant for 100% backup power, because the way our facilities are going to be set up is we have this big aquifer that we're pumping in. We're going to run the plant pretty much steady state at a high capacity for a while, and we have the ability to inject desalination water into the aquifer. So if there's a power outage, I can make it a couple days. And that, of course, now you all know we're living the PSPS events, and certainly Monterey is subject to those. So we did not provide backup power for the full plant. We did provide backup power for the control building and the SCADA systems and for the high service pumping. So if I've got a big clear well, I can still pump out for a little while. But we didn't go into that level of detail because we thought that was too redundant. Because in the end, we are trying to watch cost as well for our customers.
Thank you.
Yep.
Doug, Dennis? I've got one while
Yeah.
he's looking. What, did you have a number on a per slant well installation, per unit? Per
I have
pod?
it on my spreadsheet.
I
I
thought
could
maybe
look
at
it up.
the top of your head, perhaps,
I want to say it's in the 4 to 5 million range, but I could double check
per well?
per well.
Okay, thank you. Dennis?
Yes, I think you answered this question, but you said an assumed 95% annual usage, and that means about plus or minus 20 days a year that you're not in service. You have that ability because of your injecting it into the groundwater supply, but we'll need to keep that in mind here as that relates to supplying customer needs. If we have to be out of service for those many days, we need to also have some kind of a backup supply to be able to service our customers during the time that we would be when the plant would not be operating.
And if I can add to clarify too, we do have a redundant train, so all of our costs assume a redundant train, and so we actually in our EIR this was looked at, because if we're running 6.4 but we're offline for 2 weeks, and I want to make up that water, so to speak, then our EIR assumes that we can turn the plant wide open and have all trains online to make up that shortfall. Now, it doesn't work if you don't have someplace to put it, but the idea is at least the pricing I have includes a redundant train for you as well, because that's how I did our cost estimates.
As you were doing your introductory remarks, you also mentioned about the information sharing that has occurred among the desal plant operators and potential operators here. And I wonder if we know, or if you consulted with Carlsbad on their electricity rates to know how that program was working out.
I did not talk to them specifically on their power costs.
Is that something that we would be able to learn if we asked that question of Carlsbad?
I would hope so.
Thank you. I see the nod from the right person in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
I would point out the one difference on the Carlsbad versus what we're proposing, and it's going to be the pretreatment. So our pretreatment, because we're using the slant wells, it's a little less energy intensive than what Carlsbad has. Not that they did anything wrong, it's just they have a different source water quality. So you have to make sure you look at that when you're comparing numbers.
And what was the pretreatment assumptions that were made for Doheny desal?
So I use what we used, which is we have pressurized filter designed to remove iron and manganese. And the only thing I tweaked on that was the loading rate. American Water, we tend to be a little conservative. I didn't So I bumped it up for you guys to more traditional loading rate, but that's basically that's the cost that you have built in your model. Now, that's just a costing model. What you can find is that cost can cover a bunch of different pretreatment options for you based on what your quality would be.
Did you select to do green sand filtration or use pure flow technology, or can you share with
It
us
was
what
it wasn't green sand per se, but it would function like a green sand. So basically a multimedia pressure filter.
Thank you.
Well, I'll open it up a little bit. I know we have quite a few experts in the audience here. We have folks from Santa Margarita Water District, MODOC, as I'm scanning the room, obviously Poseidon, I see IDEs here, and others. I probably missed a couple of people, but any questions from any of these folks that might, you have some background, you might want to throw a curveball?
You may got guys
Since we're
smarter than me out there.
since we're in the World Series here. Yes, sir, Art.
Early on in your presentation, you mentioned the difference between certain bolts.
Yep.
And early this year, I learned something new from, and you mentioned Hawkins Delafield. We had a workshop with them, and he introduced the concept of industrial grade and utility grade. I'd never heard that before, but I'd like you to do a little deeper dive into, there's profit motive in every contract, regardless of what the contracting and project delivery method is.
Mhm.
Profit motive is there, and so there is always the temptation to try to enhance profit. But when you're worrying about sustainability of operation, there is a tension. So how did you work that through?
So we assembled, the best way to say it is, we're a very active owner, right? So we assembled an internal team of experts in American Water and some consultants to put together our RFP document. And Hawkins Delafield was part of that team as well. And so we were very, very specific. We were very specific on loading rates. We were very specific on material types. And that's what the base bid was. So all bidders had to bid on what we wanted. Now, we didn't want to lose out on the concept of some good ideas. So we asked them as part of the bidding process, tell us ideas that you think could save us money or things that you could maybe last longer, so we can evaluate that as part of the bid package. And remember, all that is out on the web, so you can see everything that we did. You can see the results and what people proposed on. But in the end, we want what we want. So even when we negotiated our final price with C.D.M. Smith, we then said, well, we don't like that idea, even though you're our the selected firm. We don't like how you did that. We want you to do it our way. And then we negotiated a price to work it out that way. So it's just based on the experience of our staff, and we're willing to certainly share all that stuff with you guys if it helps.
Great. Rick.
Can you briefly go into your slant well testing, and I don't know if you want to compare to us, if you know what we've done through MODOC, but I'm just curious as to your slant well testing, what you ran, how long it ran for, and things of that nature.
Yeah, so, and also every bit of that data is also on our website. Yeah, I mean, it's tons and tons of data. And I'm going a little bit off memory here, but basically we ran our slant well over 600 days at pretty much 2,000 gallons a minute the entire time. We did have some power quality issues with PG&E just because we're at the end of the line, and we know in the final product we'd have to have a little better, more reliable power. So when you look at our graphs that we put online, you see a lot of blips. Most of them were power outages or power blips where the thing turned off. The unit performed greatly. I think one of the benefits, or one of the things we learned, and of course we used the same consultants that did yours as did ours. We spent a lot of time in the development phase of that well, and so that was critical to make sure the well performed at the best it's could. But certainly, Geoscience, who's the firm we use, they learned a lot by doing another one, and I think the next one will be better. We learned some tricks during construction that would make it go faster the next go around, and how the gravel pack's done and all those type of things. But we were very pleased with the well's performance. Very pleased with the equipment. Other than the bolt I mentioned, pretty much everything worked out. So 600 days of running. So pretty impressed with that.
Dennis.
Yes, can you describe a little bit for us your project management team and how you structured that project management as an active owner?
Yeah.
If we were to play that role as an active owner, what kind of team members would we have in that group that would be managing the project?
No, so great question. So we have a little bit how American Water, my California American Water team is structured. So I was at that time the vice president of engineering. The vice president of engineering who's in that spot now, he's pretty much actively involved in the project. So it does take a lot of his time, but it's the most important project for us. We have a local engineering manager who's in Monterey as well. And then we have an assistant engineering manager. The assistant engineering manager, pretty much all he does is work on this project. The engineering manager there is probably in the 95% range. So those are internal folks. Then on top of that, we have people that help with all the budgeting and the forecasting of cash and all those type of things that are working on the project pretty much daily. And then we have a whole host of consultants. And we couldn't get it done without the consultants. So the consultants are a big part of this as well. For that project, AECOM has served as one of the main consultants for us, and part of it's getting through the permitting phase. We haven't started construction yet. When we get to construction, then we'll transition. We have some internal American Water folks. That's all they do is construction management and construction inspection for us. But we'll also lean on our consultants to help with that task as well.
The contract management, once Delafield had done their work, did they play a role at the back end of the project as well?
We're not quite done yet. So when we have an issue, we call them up and they help us. That's kind of how we're structured right now.
Thank you.
Jody, do we have a microphone for the audience by any chance? The general manager, Santa Margarita, Dan Ferens, has a question or comment.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. Well thought out report. The only question I had was, obviously Santa Margarita has not the same coastal presence that South Coast does, and we're a few feet higher up in elevation. So what's the assumption coming off the $1,800? Is this at the fence line and at what HGL we're talking about?
So I'll tell you what's in the cost here, and then they can extrapolate. Our plant, so we're located, so basically when I did the energy cost, I used what we did in Monterey. Okay, and then they'll probably have to tweak it for there. But we have slant wells at sea level. Our plant, desal plant, is located at elevation 100, and then our high service pumping gets us to a grade line of just over 500. So that's kind of built into the energy cost, horsepower, if you will, needed. If you're over elevation 500, then yeah, you've probably got to add that into yours. In our Monterey service area, we serve all the way up to 1,200, but that wasn't in those models. That's covered somewhere else.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. In our Doheny estimate, we had assumed product water pumps just delivering essentially to South Coast service area, around the 400-foot kind of general head mark.
Yes, Stan.
Yeah, I submitted a speaker slip, but I don't need to speak. I just want to ask a question. I just want to make sure I didn't get left out here. One of the things in this business, we're always comparing projects, and other people are comparing projects to try to figure out what makes the most sense for each water agency. And one of the things I have to try to explain to people, even in my own office, is the difference between the acre-foot cost of the Monterey project versus other projects. And looking at your information tonight, it seems to me the pipeline is a big component of that. Is that what the major difference is, you would say?
That's one of the major ones. If you looked at our desal plant cost, it's probably in line with other desal plants around. But we have, we have that pipeline cost. And then the question when we put estimates out in the PUC process, we didn't know what financing we'd ultimately get. So the way it works for us, just so you know, in case you see different numbers, is we have to notify customers on the worst case scenario. So the numbers you see for us are our worst case scenario. We want to do better than that because our customers expect us to do better,
Sure.
but we have to tell them that up front. So and so the financing is a big part of that project as well. What we end up getting, we certainly think the 1.9 is available. That's what the state board's saying, and that's a huge part of that cost as well.
Which just reminds me to congratulate the district for getting an invitation for WIFIA. I think that was a great mark for the project. We're in the same boat on Huntington Beach, and we're having to recalculate some of our cost estimates based upon that, not because we get the money, but because the requirements that go along with it in terms of the steel and other issues. That's not incorporated in this analysis.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So the biggest difference I see in the numbers, like we saw from MODOC last year, and GHD's numbers and your numbers are not in the capital side; they're in the operations side. So, as I understand it, how would you characterize the difference between your calculations on O&M? I know some of it's based upon new information, like on the membranes, but that actually lowers the estimate.
Right.
So is it the labor side and the monitoring is the biggest issues?
Probably. I mean, all the assumptions are they're going to have all that stuff
Yeah.
when I give them all the raw files as well, and they can probably answer that maybe a little better. But my purpose was to take my project and try to make it 5 MGD to give you guys a benchmark. So that's how I did it.
Yeah, I might want to add to that. It is part of it is on the labor side. We did when GHC did their first set of estimates, and Mark can expand on this. It was a lower FTE count, but it was looking at different conditions. So, Mark, can you?
Yeah, but we did not assume that the plant would have to be manned 24/7. So we don't have that's why we went a little bit lower FTE, full-time employee equivalents on there. So that was one of the assumptions we made, which may still hold true. We'll just have to see how it goes.
So another comment I had, and Director Urban already beat me to it, is that I think you have to assume a little bit lower productivity rate. What we found, of course, in Carlsbad is there are unexpected things we find on these projects. So you have to build in, I think, a little bit of contingency into. In your case, you have a different situation. We can go down and not deliver water to Water Authority as we have done when we had the red tides, and they didn't need it, and so there wasn't any impact. And of course, under our arrangement, we eat that. We don't get paid unless we provide water to them. But in your case, it's different. So I think it was a good point you made.
Dennis has another, and then Carl after that.
Thank you. Did you have to pay, or are you in negotiation with the State Lands Commission for any leases that as part of the slant wells for their offshore leases? I'll call it.
We are. I don't remember that exact number, but it's in our labor and miscellaneous category where we cover that up. I know based on what they charge you for the test well, I think that number is pretty reasonable, but we'll see what it is when you have all the wells out there.
That may be a test number too.
Second.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Second item, just to make an observation here about the final costs and how this really looks to me in terms of trying to make an evaluation, and that is that we end up with a $12 million a year cost for this project when you include the operation, the debt service, and I don't think we've included in here the cost that we've spent to date, which is about $7 million as I understand it. So that would need to be added into a full, dollar for dollar analysis. Currently, in our budget for 2020, we are going to pay MODOC $6 million a year for water. And this project would 100% substitute for that project or for that expense. So as I see it, we would be trading a $6 million a year bill for a $12 million a year bill. And so we need to really see if that additional $6 million a year that we are going to be asking our ratepayers to come up with, what is that buying for us? And one of the things that when you look at the analysis that MODOC did with respect to long-term supply stability and so forth, we look at this being a supply project. But also, is it really a redundancy project unless we put in full redundant electric power? So we need to take a look at whether we need to add a component to this project to make it fully redundant electrically. And so these are the questions that I see this board still having to tussle with now that we've got what I think are some pretty good numbers in front of us to deal with. And so it's going to be a lot of push-pull here to try to make sense of all of what we have and evaluate that and find out whether the 12,200 customers that we have are willing to step up and pay the additional $6 million a year that this project would cost once it came online. And then we also have to recognize that we're not going to be able to step away from the entire $6 million bill for MODOC, because there are going to be some readiness to serve charges and other fixed charges that are part of the MODOC bill. So I think that all has to become part of the analysis that we look to here. And perhaps we need to ask our customers, are they willing to pay that extra $490 a month per customer? I'm sorry, $490 per year per customer to engage in this project.
I have a couple of thoughts. One, two, and I agree. We definitely need to revisit those, but I just wanted to make sure I'm seeing this right, and someone else can speak on my behalf. But the $12 million might be misleading, because that's before you apply the MET rebate, which is another $2.5 million of rebate. So I apologize. That's how it's shown here. So you can take off the $2.5 million for the MET rebate, and the grant amount. Not that I'm being optimistic here, but there's 18.3 million. We're still in the process of applying for more. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the main component that's missing off of that. Also, not in direct response to Director Erdman's comments, but I'm a little delayed. I've been hearing things, and I just wanted to make sure that the record is correct. Dan Ferens asked a really good question about the HGLs, and it's more a question about the regional benefit of the project. And I wanted to make sure that it's understood that this project, the way it's structured now, is at the fence line and would serve the South Coast Water District area. However, we have the benefit of the joint regional water supply system pipelines being adjacent to the site. And Carl Seckel knows much more about the HGLs there, but it could feed all the way up to the Moulton-Niguel area without additional pump station capacity through the southern end of the joint regional system, which would include San Clemente area. There are potentially interested agencies such as Santa Margarita Water District and El Toro Water District, who I spoke to recently. El Toro would need to install their own infrastructure, pump station capacity, but I want to make sure the public understands that it does have that potential regional benefit of feeding the joint regional pipeline, which could serve a pretty large proportion of South Orange County without significant pump station expenses.
And Rick, if I could add one thing too. This topic was brought up a couple weeks ago at the coffee chat when a member of the public asked about the kind of impact of the monthly bills and percentage-wise increases. Even if we were looking at the $1,800 per acre foot, for your typical household, the tier 2 household, we're still just looking at, that impact is about a $10 per month impact, or about a 9% increase in their typical monthly expenditure for water. It's the simple analysis where we take the overall, what they'd pay with their taxes and all that, and break it down on a 12-month basis. And we had presented similar numbers before in a workshop with a range of dollars per acre foot. So that $1,800 per acre foot was one of those numbers we had shown before. And just to refresh everyone's memory, it's about $10 per month type of a number.
One comment I would like to make. The old numbers showed 1,500 plus or minus per acre foot, but that was before escalation, which is 3% times 5 or 6 years. So there's really the 1,800 is pretty much right on what the old number is escalated. Doug.
I just don't see how you get $10 per bill unless you're also taking a part of that and applying it to the property taxes, which even though you're paying the property taxes once a year, you're still having to pay the property taxes. Because if you're looking at 1805, I looked at the MODOC rates for 2020 and 2019, and they're at about $1,050 an acre foot. So you're talking about a $720, $725 difference.
I think we're looking at about 1,200 escalated of the MODOC rate, but it's that's generally the simple math.
If you're using that number, you're looking at about $25 a connection. And when you look at the MODOC or the MET rebate going away, you're talking about $16.
Yeah, but I don't think it's per connection. We looked at this. We looked at a tier 1 rate, a tier 2 rate, a tier 3 rate, HOA, resorts. We did all this. It's that's where the numbers came out. We did it in a workshop before.
Maybe we should have a workshop on that.
My concern is the area under the curve.
That much better.
We talked about it before, the area under the curve, what we're paying versus what the MET rate is, and that's what we're having to pay additionally for desal. I have another question that I just wanted to clarify. In the Monterey project, you show the desal plant being $132 million for the 6.4 MGD.
Yes.
And for the 9.6, you had $141 million. That's about a 7% difference to go up by 50% capacity.
Yep.
And then you look at the O&M costs, and you're buying water, and it's actually $3 million cheaper. Are you building the 6.4 or are you building the 9.6?
We're building the 6.4. That's what the commission ordered us to do.
Okay.
Even though the economics didn't always work out.
Okay. I was just curious because it looks like it pays itself off in 4 years to get 50% more water. Okay.
It's 6 years of a hearing process. That's where we ended up.
And can I respond? We will definitely bring that back in some workshop forum in terms of the area under the curve, because we do need to get an understanding of that. So a couple of other things I wanted to clarify on the brine modeling, because to the benefit of all the audience here, we went through it through a previous board workshop. But the current understanding going through the regional board models, et cetera, is that we wouldn't have to make significant upgrades to the existing Sakwa outfall. So we don't have those significant expenditures that others may be experiencing. That's one of the other benefits of this project. Would you agree to that, Mark? And also mitigation costs. We did want to include that. So when Mark and GHC had done this initial cost estimates, there were a lot of variables that we were unsure of with state parks and the land values, costs of mitigation after the EIR was completed, including the 100% carbon neutral. So a lot of those factors were included into this analysis as well. So we wanted to make sure we were very current on that.
Rich, I would like to ask you a question, and it's a little bit of in your business.
Okay.
What was your final acre foot number, and can you share how much you went on environmental? On the environmental.
So we're going to be between $4,000 and $5,000 an acre foot, all in.
And your EIR and all the environmental.
We spent over $12 million on the EIR.
And the legal.
It's in the same range.
Okay, very good. Yes, sir. Could you pass the mic? Oh, thank you.
Hi, Rich. Quick question to kind of follow up on Bill's question there. Because either Doheny or Callahan will be the first subsurface intake really gone through the process under the Ocean Plan Amendment for desalination. What do you anticipate the cost for the permitting on getting your MPDS permits and your water code determinations, as well as any coastal commission? Well, I guess you're in the coastal commission process. I don't want to open that wound too much right now. But specifically the water code determination process and checking all the OPA boxes. And what contingencies you have built in terms of schedule drift that may arise as you go through that process, and she'll be possibly the first one.
Yeah, so I don't have a great answer, unfortunately. So the way we did our budgeting is we basically have we budgeted a 20% implementation cost in our overall $329 million, and that's the pool of money that's paying for all those things. And right now we're within the budget we kind of established to do that. By the time we get to the end, will 20% be enough? I don't quite know yet. From a schedule perspective, since the cease and desist order on us is from the State Water Resources Control Board, we are hoping, praying that there is an expedition of that process, because this is ultimately to satisfy an order from them.
Yeah.
And we keep pushing. But to be honest, like I said, one of us will be the first, and it's hard to know how fast that's going to go.
Thank you.
As you did your value engineering, what did you see the primary benefits of the value engineering to be? Was it more of building in the reliability of the project because of your careful selection of materials, or do you think it was in cost reduction because of methodology of construction, those kinds of things?
So the reason we entered into the value engineering is I didn't go into all the details, but we entered into a governance agreement with all the local public elected officials, because they were worried that since we were a privately owned company, that all of our costs would not be shared with the public. And part of the negotiations for doing this governance agreement was we agreed to do a value engineering study where we would let them be a participant in that study. Ultimately, we did the entire study. We didn't actually change a lot. I mean, very, very little, because we went in with a good, robust design that worked to be pretty good. We have a list. I brought it with me, probably 70 items, and we looked at all sorts of stuff, everything from what kind of fence goes around the property to what kind of process we put in the plant. In the end, we chose not to elect anything, to be honest. Now, we did do, we had the foresight during the bidding process to bid multiple different options so that we would have some flexibility when we awarded. So a good example is, after the RO process, you have to remineralize the water. And there's a couple different proprietary products out there. So we looked at 3 of them. And we had the bidders propose on all 3, and then we did our own evaluations to pick one. But in the end, we there's only, of the list we have, we probably did 2 or 3 of the items. Some of them were electric, some of them were safety. So the value, it is a good process, don't get me wrong, but we did it more because we wanted the public agents to see that we weren't gold plating this thing. Just so you know, because I'm an investor-owned utility, I make more return the higher the capital cost. So some people were of the opinion that I would gold plate this thing so I make more money, and that's not how we work. I have customers too, right? I don't like getting those calls about the bill, so I don't. But that's the perception, right? So that's part of why we did that.
And is it necessary to have any redundant power at your plant in order to do an orderly shutdown in the event that you do lose your primary source of power?
Can you say it again, just make sure I understand what you're...
What I'm thinking about is, do you need a certain amount of standby power to be able to successfully shut the plant down if you have a total loss of power, in order to pickle the RO membranes or whatever it is necessary to do to bring the plant to a successful idle?
Yes. Yeah, so we have that. We didn't provide backup power for the high horsepower feed pumps that drove the high pressures to the membranes, but we have sufficient backup power to do most everything else. But until we got line power, we wouldn't be cranking up the plant full. But like I said, we could run the labs, we could run SCADA, we could run certainly run the high service pumping, and so we had a generator that could do all that. So when we laid out, and our drawings are online, by the way, our 60% design, I think, I know our 30% designs are online. We're willing to share how we laid all that electrical stuff out as well.
I guess what I'm struggling with, I probably should have asked you a while ago, but the different objectives of the project, the way I see it, you have a performance guarantee basically on the drought-proof objective. So during the annual period, you need to perform and provide that performance guaranteed supply. Our project is different in that, so you have the redundancy in trains, et cetera, to catch up, right?
Correct.
Our project is slightly different. It does provide a drought-proof supply gap, or meets the drought supply gap, but it also, probably more importantly in the South Orange County region, meets that emergency gap. During a catastrophic emergency, we need to have that redundant power supply, and that's what Director Erdman is getting at. So I see that as a difference in the project.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that's...
It sounds different, yes.
Okay.
Agree with that.
Are there any other questions from the audience or from the board? Art?
I have more of a comment, but I'll throw it out to you. You made the statement, or actually alluded to it a couple of times, the pressure you're under from the State Water Resources Control Board to move efficiently. Well, we've had some recent experience here with the State Water Resources Control Board having a real hard time getting money out that's already been granted or loaned to the water district. So that's one reason for why I snickered. The other is this. During a few years ago, responsibility for the Safe Drinking Water Act implementation was transferred from the Department of Health to the State Water Resources Control Board.
Right.
They had to do legislation in order to accommodate that move. The comment was made during one of the meetings that I was at with the Aqua State Legislative Committee. It would be better to give that responsibility to the DMV than the State Water Resources Control Board. So that's definitely a case of the pot calling the kettle black.
I do want to clarify. I don't want to rationalize, but I want to clarify. The state had a tough time getting the money out because of a financial software upgrade that they were doing. So.
That made it feel a lot better.
Well, to not to pile on to the state, because I love the state, right? We did receive $1 million grant for the test well back in 2013 that we're still waiting payment on. So that, yes, unfortunately those things do happen.
Yeah, and my point, I hope it wasn't misunderstood. My point was they're going through that upgrade. They got us the money. There's no hard feelings on that, but we do build that into the sensitivity analysis. So in terms of the time of reimbursement, that's built into our cash flow analyses moving forward.
Additional questions, comments? All right, nothing by staff? Okay. Rich, we really appreciate you coming up from San Diego and sharing all your intel. So thank you so much for being here.
Glad to help. Thanks for including me.
I know this isn't the end of our questions, but thank you for tonight. Appreciate
no worries. And I'll stick around. This is fascinating stuff. So.
Great.
Okay.
Well, with that, the meeting is now adjourned.
How you doing? Two quick questions. One is your operating costs listed in here are annual.